has spent many years at the World Bank, IMF, and IFC, and helped to create the Stanford AI Index. And I'm currently the CEO of Taiyo.AI, a vertical AI platform for the infrastructure and construction industry. To set the stage, I want to share a couple of ideas on what it is we're going to talk about. You know, we are uniquely for the AI Summit discussing the intersection of AI and urban infrastructure. Just to as a lay of the land, infrastructure, construction shapes all our lives. It's how we take our children to school, where we go to university, how we got here, or we were delayed to come here at the AI Summit. Climate outcomes to really the new world order of geopolitics is being shaped by infrastructure. So the real question is not just who builds these ports and bridges and metros and data centers, but really whose standards, data and AI decision systems are guiding those investments. Point one, this is a multidisciplinary field of urban infrastructure, so is AI. This is the world's largest industry, around $12 trillion globally, 12% of global GDP, employs about 7% of the global workforce, yet it remains one of the least digitized industries on the planet. Operating margins are much slimmer, so if you looked at global construction companies, their margins are about 4.7% compared to 17.5% for the S&P 500. And uniquely, the productivity has been declining in this sector over the last half century. In similar vein, for introducing urban infrastructure, there's a paradox with AI capabilities as well, right? Because AI increasingly is the new infrastructure. AI capabilities are accelerating, becoming cheaper. So, for example, if you looked at training GPT or other things, some say it costed over $100 million. But in 2025, within a couple of weeks in February, the cost went down from the release of DeepSeek V1, V2, T1, and others from over $100 million to $42 million to $12 million to within $14 or something of that nature. But uniquely, the infrastructure industry still operates with very old school information. Right? So information is trapped in PDFs, fragmented records, and in the brains of experts and people. So while AI costs and AI inference has collapsed, this industry, to build intelligent autonomous systems, you need the right grounded data for this industry. So today we'll be asking this very simple question, right? What does it take to build cognitive infrastructure, what I'm calling the intelligence layer, right? To operationalize AI, it's not just a general purpose AI that's going to cut it. You need appropriate data, you need the right institutional memory and the domain knowledge of the industry to really convert this into workflows that help transform the largest industry on our planet that impacts all our lives. So how do we plan and deliver resilient infrastructure in an increasingly uncertain global market? So with that, I will move to our panelists. I'll try to keep this very structured and fast, and I'll start to tee up each speaker with one fact, ask a core question, and we'll go through a discussion subsequently. So thank you all for that background. Let me move. Oh, Stuart. I must admit, Stuart is a hero of mine. I wouldn't have got, like many others, into the field of AI if Stuart had not written his legendary book. Professor Stuart Russell is at UC Berkeley and leads work on human-compatible AI. The idea that advanced systems should be designed around uncertainty about human preferences, not just rigid, fixed objectives. He's been publicly warning that as AI moves into real-world systems, new failure modes emerge that can become catastrophic, much like how Chernobyl or Green Mile, if you're familiar with these nuclear power plant disasters. These are not existentialist risks, but a real ground reality. So, Stuart, in infrastructure and construction industry, we don't get to beta test. We don't get to move fast and break things. If a grid failure cascades, or a transport water permitting network, fails, these are irreversible consequences. So, in your mind, Stuart, what does AI safety actually mean when AI touches physical systems? And who is going to bear the cost of these errors? Society, the government, or just the digital infrastructure?
Thank you, Saurabh. This is a very interesting question to move from the very general concerns, as you mentioned. I've been working on the question of existential risk, which basically boils down to one simple question: how do you retain power forever over entities more powerful than human beings? And I think the answer is, until you answer that question, you don't go there. But we are going there anyway. And I would say, fortunately, in one sense, the physical world is much less forgiving. So the physical world is not fooled by glib fluency of the kind displayed by large language models. Gravity remains gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared. And if the robot doesn't understand that, the robot will fall over or drop whatever it's holding, and so on. And I think we're also, as a society, much less forgiving about failure in the physical world. So, for example, Uber, while testing its autonomous driving capabilities, killed a pedestrian. That closed down Uber's self-driving program. OpenAI recently caused, or may at least allegedly caused, the suicide of a child. Has that closed down ChatGPT? Actually, no, not at all. They just carried on. Collateral damage, so what? So, I think in the physical world, the first thing you might think of is, well, okay, we'll build an AI system that is going to control the electrical grid. We're already building AI systems that control our financial world. Most of the trades that happen in the world are carried out by algorithms, and they have had catastrophes. And so markets have built-in circuit breakers precisely to short circuit the catastrophes that can be caused by algorithms that we don't understand interacting with each other in ways we don't understand. So you could have failures of the grid, of the financial system, of our communication systems. Arguably, AI is also causing our democratic systems to fail and our social cohesion to break down. But I think a far greater risk is what we might call collective de-skilling. So this has been observed with human pilots, with airlines, as the planes depend more and more on autopilots to carry out takeoff, level flight, landing, and so on. The pilots lose the ability to do those things. And when they're asked to take over when something weird happens, they can no longer fly the plane properly. So the airlines discovered this, and now they subject the pilots to regular re-skilling so that they can actually cope with the demands of flying. But in the collective sense, it's much harder because there won't be any one person in charge, and the de-skilling is happening in small amounts across many thousands of people, and in the ways those people interact with each other. And I would recommend to everyone a book called The Machine Stops. So the machine stops is written by E.M. Forster, who also wrote A Passage to India, among other books. And it was written in 1909. And in the world that he describes, almost everyone communicates by email and video conference with each other. They spend most of their time taking online courses. They don't like face-to-face contact with each other. If they ever leave their rooms, they come back to a huge email backlog. They become obese because they never get any exercise. Does any of this sound familiar? Right? This is from 1909. And they have outsourced the management of their physical infrastructure to the machine. And of course, then they no longer know how it works. They lose the ability to manage their own civilization. And this can only happen with machines. Think about it. If you add it up, over the course of human history, we've spent about 1 trillion person years teaching and learning so that our civilization continues to the next generation. And even in the pre-human times, the knowledge of how to make stone tools was passed on over 40,000 generations consecutively in parts of Africa. 40,000 generations without being lost. And then we develop paper so we can put our knowledge on paper, but the paper doesn't run civilizations. And so it has to get back into the minds of humans in order for our civilization to continue. But with AI, we then break that chain. Because we put the knowledge in the AI can run our civilization, and then we lose the ability. So if you've seen Wall-E, one of the most subversive movies that Disney ever produced, in Wall-E, the human race has lost the ability to run its own civilization because AI is doing everything for us. So I think this is the biggest risk in outsourcing the management of our infrastructure. So there's a huge difference between outsourcing to AI and being supported by AI. And we should think very hard about how to make sure it's AI supporting the human management of our infrastructure and the construction of it, rather than outsourcing it to AI. Thank you.
Harshit, management team. Excuse me. Harshit hai?
Thank you for that, Stuart. It was funny, I was speaking to a teenager yesterday, and he was like, you know, I rely on AI so much that I can't live without it. And something that, you know, comes to mind is the erosion of critical thinking, especially in the younger generation, right, as you were talking about de-skilling. AI very likely could be itself a risk. Bertrand, I'm going to skip over the niceties, but another big risk that you have pioneered for a long time is climate leadership, and how do we deal with climate change in a changing planet. So in a world with uncertain geopolitical environment, where multilaterals themselves and geopolitical and infrastructure, right, the lines are being intertwined more than ever, who really sets the rules for sustainable infrastructure in your mind? And what does the geopolitical leadership of sustainability and sustainable infrastructure look, in your view, in the coming years?
Thank you, Sora, and I'm very happy to be here, being French and in a way carrying the baton from the AI summit in Paris last February to India this year. And I don't want to overemphasize that point, but it's important that it moves from France to India and not from the US to China only. And saying that, I want to highlight what you said. I mean, I'm glad you highlighted the existential questions that are being raised by everything we discussed today. I'm going to be more prosaic, even if the existential questions are, of course, of the utmost interest for all of us. But AI is also a geopolitical and financial question. It's a geopolitical question for sure, because I mentioned two big countries, which basically describe all of this as a race, and some of the actors describe this as a race to dominate the world. I mean, And when you read some of the paper written by some of the actors, it's quite scary, actually, the vision of the world. And I don't think that, and that's for me is a critical question for this panel, not in general, is that if you follow the money, and unfortunately in capitalism, follow the money is a pretty good compass. If you follow the money, you have some money going to making AI more sustainable. Basically address the issues, because, in part because people are nervous that AI will suck all the energy, additional energy produced in the coming years. That's okay, but there is not that much money, and I hope this room is witnessing the contrary. There is not that much money that goes to AI, I would say AI for climate or AI for green, etc. And that's for me an important question. I had a year ago, actually, I was a little somber, and somebody in a room like this told me, "Why are you so somber? It's amazing AI and the technological and scientific boom happening. I mean, it's going to be a great, great golden period ahead of us." And I say, true, like in 1930. In 1930, you had nuclear, you had quantics, you had antibiotics, you had the fertilizers, everything. And it's true that 20 years later, we started a glorious period. But in the meantime, we did some mistakes. So my point today is I don't want to take this as a parable or whatever. It might not happen. But it's important to realize that it will not happen naturally. The money will not naturally go where we think it should go. Let's face it. And for me, it's absolutely crucial. I mean, the whole people, I mean, I remember when I arrived, the first time I came to India was in 2013. I was at that time managing director of the World Bank, and I came here to discuss infrastructure. The objective was to position infrastructure, as we said at that time, as an asset class. It was part of the journey to the Sustainable Development Goals adopted in 2015. Let's face it, what happened between 2013 and 2015 has not been a success. I mean, we agreed to a significant number of objectives, including through the Paris Accord, reducing the rise in temperature. 10 years later, I mean, we celebrated and participated to the celebration of the 10-year anniversary in Paris. I mean, we are off track. We're off track not only on climate, but on almost all the objectives we had agreed to. And even if we keep writing, and actually Saurabh and I have been writing some paper on AI will help solve the problem. Yes, if we make the decision that AI will help solve the problem. Because if not, I mean, the money will not go in that direction. People are more interested in drones, for instance, or many other things being discussed here. And so, why I like the panel you put together, I think it's our responsibility to address the real needs of our planet. That's really for me the important message. Again, if you look back at the 1930s, fortunately or unfortunately, we started with the Manhattan Project before going to the civil use of nuclear. I hope we avoid the mistake this time. So for me, it's a geopolitical question, because the issue, and you raise the question of multilateralism, and maybe I should finish with that, not to be too long. The problem, as I often say today, we have two issues. First, the engine of our economy is not heading us into the right direction. So we have to adjust the engine. That was the objective of Sustainable Development Goals, that was the objective of the Paris Accord. That's what we've been discussing for ages since. So we have a problem of the engine. But the big problem is that when you want to repair your engine, you go to a garage. And the problem is that today the garage is also broken. I mean, the UN is not working that well. I mean, I know the World Bank, I mentioned the IMF and others. It's not going very well. So the question is, how can we basically find a garage which helps us address engine issues? I'm convinced that AI is a fantastic tool. Like the way finance is a fantastic tool. But the common wisdom say, a tool is governed by the end, not the other way around. And that's our challenge. We have, and I concur with you, what do we want to do with it? If not, I mean, money, we just follow the money. And then I think we have a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Bertrand. Don't mean to be a downer, but I think this panel, as we begin this, we should just stop taking of all the risks our society and the physical world faces, from Stuart about AI as a risk to capital flows, right? And who will really lead? The article we wrote there, Bertrand, was really about the AI we need to build to help us build sustainable infrastructure. Going further on those lines, Suparna, to you, leading special projects at one of the largest construction companies here in India and globally. Something we have discussed offline, challenge very unique to the infrastructure industry, right? I think people scare about AI taking over jobs and all of this buzz. But something unique about our industry, Suparna, is that 41% of the workforce, not true in India, but true in the US, in the construction industry will retire in the next 4 to 5 years. So the problem is upside on its head. We don't have enough labor to build the trillions of dollars of infrastructure we're planning to spend. And young kids find it, if I may, sexier to go to big tech than come into the heavy civil engineering industry. How do you see the workforce transformation unique to our infrastructure and construction industry, and what are possible solutions for that as well?
Thanks, Saurabh. Um, First of all, let me just spend a little bit of time on the infrastructure industry and the EPC, the engineering, procurement, and construction industry per se. This industry is informal industry. The workers, 95% of them are informal and floating. This is also a industry which is, considered as 3D. That is, it's dirty, it's dangerous, and it's also distant, and some people say with demeaning. So it's not attracting a lot of young talent or young people into its fold. Add to that the fact that the technological or the educational, the curriculum does not embrace the need for AI into its when they're teaching the students, and therefore there's a gap that is coming up, and there's no incentive for them to fill up the gap. The older workforce that is there are not very keen, or rather resistant to accepting any technological advancement. And the younger workforce are not very keen to learn the traditional ways of working with the hands and the tools. The dimension of the human element is, if I may look at US, which is a replacement crisis, because the average age of the workmen is around 42 years, due to retire, and they have to import labor to do the infrastructure work that they have as a blueprint. China, average median age is around 43. And there is a productivity crisis that unless they automate, they cannot survive. India is a unique position. The median age is around 28 years. It's a quality crisis because there's a skill gap to what they know and what is required on the field. Add to that the dimension that the labor, cheap labor, rather the labor is cheaper than a technological investment into this market. So what do you do? So in this pot boiler of things, we have this creeping digital transformation, which is led more, and which should be rather led more by corporates and government policies, which see how it enables productivity, how it enables safety, how it enables a better working environment, and how it brings in more and more young people into the fold, because the infrastructure of tomorrow has to be built by the youth of today. And therefore, everything that we do has to be packed around this. So I can take further questions.
Thank you, Suparna. And we'll come back to this topic shortly. It's a very unique challenge, right? Because I think uniquely for our industry in construction, productivity has been declining, unlike any other industry. I'll be inquisitive on your thoughts on when you think robots will start doing on-site construction, but that's for a separate discussion. But similar to what we're discussing with Suparna, Mihir, I'd like to come to you at a more macro picture about development. I myself grew up in the state of Bihar, and I was, and Mihir is the development commissioner for the state of Bihar currently. And I was very inspired, right, to look at the development challenges in the state of Bihar, to join the World Bank and help make a difference. And I think things have changed a lot thanks to your leadership in the state. Something we were discussing shortly earlier was that India's growth is hyper concentrated. Right? 13 districts alone nearly generate half of the GDP, with hundreds of districts, where the demographic dividend exists in India, are in the eastern part of India. So maybe just diving deeper into this, what actions, right, have been taken, and how do you view the vision for not just Bihar, but a lot of the, if I may call, lagging states and the workforce transformation interacting with the spatial divergence that exists in India's growth and development?
Thanks, Saurabh. Well, having worked in the infrastructure sector and other sectors like industry and even agriculture, I've seen one thing. The right policies, the right mixture of policies makes a difference. It takes some time to catch up with the rest of the world, especially when you are lacking in capital. If you look at any of the traditional forces that we say in economics, so land is there in Bihar, available, slightly in the scarcity because of land acquisition, but then when the government is there, land acquisition can be done very easily as it is being done these days. Labor is available. Skills, yes. Technology, yes, has to be transferred. But capital, how to attract capital becomes a difficult challenge. And for that, you need the right kind of policies. The government of Bihar has, in the recent years, especially looked at all the infrastructure very constructively, and along with the best of the roads now in the country, we are now building expressways, the airports, so some four functional airports and 9 more coming up, and waterways. So the infrastructure, even power is there in abundance. So especially for our needs, but of course for needs like IT services and AI and semiconductor, for which we have addressed, we have made a new policy, and also for GCC we will have places where you need much more power, and therefore we are working on those things. Other things, one very important part, we said how to attract how to get into the high-speed ladder. I think one important thing is look at the current circumstance and then make a policy towards how you are going towards it. So it depends. At this point of time, we are working on industry as a manufacturing sector, and in, say, for example, textiles or industries which are there, food processing, these lower rung of things which is there in labor intensive. We work towards that, and also in IT sector. So we have the policies in order to attract the GCCs. The semiconductor policy has also come, which because we are abundant in power and contrary to the general perception, and also in water. So along with that, we are working on this. So overall, the picture is, in order to catch up with the rest of India, for all the lagging districts and lagging states, you have to have a tailor-made policy dependent upon whatever are your important factors, whatever are your growth factors, and decide on that. So every from state to state.
Thank you, Mayor. And we'll come back to this topic as we go further in the discussion. Say you've spent your career on building more open source approaches to technological advancement. Given these opportunities and threats posed by AI, as well as evolving climate conditions, the unique challenges of the largest industry, and what Mihir talked about here, right, about the spatial divergence and how regions, not just in India, but same goes in the US, right? If you looked at AI investments, they're hyper concentrated. No other city catches up with Silicon Valley, not even New York. Like it's more than tenfold difference in investment. What role does open source approaches, and what have you seen worked to address these divergences and inequalities? And maybe you can shed some color on your ideas for emerging markets and specifically in an Indian context, if you have thought about it?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So a lot of what I will describe comes from the work I'm doing. Carnegie developed something called the Open Forum for AI, which is a multi-institutional, university academic-led, nonprofit-led partnership trying to bend the arc to human sector AI. And openness is a key design principle for that. So I've spent a good deal of time looking at the development of digital infrastructure, in particular the internet and the web. And a few key points that I want to make is they're actually socio-technical developments. So we talk a lot about the technology, but even workforce is a move in that direction, or social dimensions. And for both of those development efforts around the internet and the web, a triad of government, industry, and academia in balance was really important. So that aspect of building that community is really key. That triad of those communities is really key at a global scale. And openness helps foster that. So open data and open standards in many ways lower the barriers to entry, lower the friction for communities to work together. So we just had a conversation recently, you and I, with an academic group called the Open Construction Group, and we had put them in touch with Zara to talk about Taiyo, which I think has more connections in the government and the private sector so far. But if we don't have open standards or open data between those three sectors, which is hard enough to get them to work together, then it becomes even harder. When you think about something like open source, it is a powerful mechanism for broadening participation, right? So you start to see people be involved when otherwise the systems are closed. And this has profound implications not only at the individual level. You literally have individuals making contributions to projects or even maintaining projects that are used by Fortune 500 companies. It's terms of economic outputs. Frank Nagel, who's a faculty member of the Harvard Business School, has conducted a study where he has analyzed that open source software has contributed nearly $9 trillion to the worldwide economy and reduced the production costs by a factor of 3.5. So this is not just some, often cast as altruistic and it's sort of, you do it because you believe in it and because of your values and principles. There is real economic value to working in this way. And I think one of the very interesting questions is, can being more open help address some of the issues we've heard about today, right? In terms of the transparency. Does it help us think more about safety? Does it help with knowledge transfer? We talked about generations retiring. Can it help with those types of issues? One point of comparison I make is that there was this outage that was caused some time ago when CrowdStrike had an outage. And it caused cascading failures throughout airports, throughout various types of systems. You've got Amazon, web services failures, and so on. You never know what actually happens. The company then remediates it and says everything's fine. There's a very famous case of an open source software which had a vulnerability called the XZ vulnerability, which could have been a very serious issue. But one of the committers actually looked at it and said, something's not right. This is taking most long to run. And because he was able to look at the code, he was able to see something had been done and address it. So can that type of transparency actually help us as well in terms of building this kind of global community? So we have that socio part of the socio-technical. We don't want multiple AI infrastructures. Imagine if we had multiple internets, multiple worldwide webs. You're right, it's not just US, China, it's not only just France and India either. There's things happening in Africa, things happening in Asia, throughout beyond India. So we're hoping that by thinking about open source AI, we can bring some of those same benefits of building communities, interoperability, transparency, and participation, and economic impacts.
Thank you for that, Saeed. And again, we'll come back to some of these discussions, but Sushant, I think you have an opportunity here to help us bring this all together. Sushant is the CEO of InfoParks Kerala, and he has built phase 1 and phase 2, and you can shed a little bit more light on phase 3, which is the first AI city in the world. Of course, I'm very inquisitive to know, what does that mean, Sushant? What is a first AI city? But help us position, as you think, to answer this, from exactly what Said's talking about, right? What is the role of transparency, open standards, open data, right, in this AI city. But if you could kindly also bring it back to where Stuart started the conversation, how do you view if these are autonomous systems and agents, right? We have no standards, no regulations. How do you envision risk management in such circumstances as well? And we'll, of course, follow up more on as you answer.
Thank you. There are far too many questions. So let me just start with this first statement. So we are building what is called an AI native city. So when we talk about an AI native city, AI will be, or rather technology will be foundational. So when we see typically in India, cities do happen. Somebody puts one building somewhere and somebody else will put another building right next to it, and then this just grows like that, and then you don't necessarily have too much of planned cities in the country. So when we are building the next phase of Infopark is an IT park in Kerala. We have two phases, and then the third phase is something which we are building as a city. So this is, at present, we are looking at a 565 acre integrated township, and that is going to be AI native. What is AI native? Every aspect of the city will have technology built in. So the data is pulled from every single thing, whether it's roads, whether it's buildings, and whether it's our pipelines and all of those kind of things. And then these data flow within the system seamless. And then we are envisaging creating what we call a city brain, which is going to ingest all these, so take all these data into a database, and then so we are going to build a system that is adaptive, predictive, and all of these things will be orchestrated. So every single thing will ideally work with each other, and that is when we retrofit these kind of things into an existing city, we can call it an AI city. But when we are building it from the ground up, that is where we call it an AI native city. So even before we create a master plan for the city, we will create a technical architecture. And then that is how that thing will. And when it comes to, you talked about risks. Anything can go wrong. If something can go wrong, it will, definitely. But in addition to all the physical risks that we're talking about, there'll be a lot of algorithmic risk also in this particular case. So you can have model drifts, something that worked last year may not work this year. And then, so there are these, fatigue when it comes to, if things are running fine, then, human oversight might go away. And then that can create another risk. And then, so then there are many issues of like the objective misalignment. So we have very high sustainability goals, and then the compute requirements will be very high on the other side too. So how do we? So when we try to balance these kind of things, one can go off. So there are plenty of things that can go wrong, but at this point we are at a stage where we are only anticipating this. If I know how to solve it, probably not yet, but we are getting there. We are in the very initial stages of putting it all together. And when it comes to, so you asked about open source and stuff like that. We want the entire ecosystem in the state and the country to contribute to that. And then the more open it is, the better, because we don't necessarily want to have another risk of vendor dependence there. So the more open it happens, the better.
Thank you, Sushant. It's funny, the early days of when OpenAI for a decade was a research lab, and the marketing efforts were really about how do we move from the sci-fi concept to really make this a household name, and they were quite successful in that. And what you're talking about, Sushant, right, might sound like sci-fi today, but it's very reasonable to think that in the coming years, this is a reality that you're leading. I'd like to come back to you, Stuart, because I'm sure you got a lot of thoughts on this. embed AI into a city's brain, as Sushant mentions, right? What's going through your head, right? What's going in your mind, right, about new risk classes that we're creating, not just model drift, cascading failures. Again, who's responsible in the government's capture, right? What are human interventions required? And you can step back more broadly, right? Because regulations and policy, right, is always reactive to the pace of AI and technological advancement. So, what's on top of your mind as Sushant's talking about the first AI city?
Thanks. Yeah, I was all ears as you were describing this, and you mentioned actually this example of, how do you trade off the sustainability goals with other interests, and this is an example that we use when we're talking about existential risk, right? If you had an AI system that was managing the global climate, and you ask it to to stop climate change, the obvious solution is just to get rid of all the people, because we're the ones who are, producing all the carbon dioxide. So get rid of the people, you solve the climate problem. And obviously, you wouldn't want your AI-driven city to come up with that solution. And so, the answer would be actually what is the way you think about the objectives that your city manager AI is actually supposed to be pursuing. And when you start to try to write it down, you're probably going to make a mistake. Invariably. And we've seen this even with something as simple as a self-driving car, right? What's the objective of a self-driving car? Well, it's to get to the destination. No, because you can get to the destination by driving through a crowd of pedestrians. That's not a good idea, right? You can get to the destination by breaking the speed limit, by braking and accelerating so fast that your passengers throw up, by cutting off all the other drivers on the road so that they get really annoyed, and so on and so on and so on. There are dozens of sub-objectives to driving, and any attempt to try to write them all down, and I know this from a fact because Waymo tried to do this for a while, and every week they'd have to update the objectives because optimizing those objectives produced weird behaviors in the vehicles, and it's still going on today. The Waymo cars every so often do really weird things because they're, in some sense, pursuing misspecified objectives. We call this the King Midas problem, that you're pursuing an objective that sounds great until you realize that it's actually catastrophic. So the solution that we've been pursuing in my research group actually is not to specify the objective and have the AI system pursue it, because that's the wrong way to think about it. The right way to think about it is to say that the inhabitants of the city, and to some extent the rest of the world as well, because there are externalities. If the city is pumping out tons of carbon dioxide, that has more aggregate effect on the rest of the world than on the inhabitants. So you should consider that as well. But the interests of the inhabitants are what matter, but we don't know exactly what they are. So the city should know that it doesn't know what the interests of the inhabitants are. It should be explicitly uncertain about the objective that it should be pursuing. And what does that mean? Well, that means that the AI system, just like an ordinary human city government, should be consulting on a regular basis with the inhabitants to find out what they like, what they don't like, asking them questions, maybe running small experiments to see how things go and what the attitude is of the inhabitants to those things. You can think of democracy as exactly this process of trying to transfer information about the interests of the people you're supposed to be serving to the government that's supposed to be serving those interests. It's a very, very imperfect channel. It's really sort of 1.1 bits of information every 4 years, which is not a lot, right? But if you formulate things this way, then you avoid exactly this pitfall of pursuing an objective that's really misaligned with the interests of the humans. And economists have observed this with GDP, right? If you pursue GDP as the objective, you can end up with an extremely unhappy country. And you can also have huge inequalities in standard of living and so on. So there's a lot to think about, and the AI city really brings this into focus in a really nice way.
Fascinating. I'd like to, quickly get a round of comments from Bertrand, Suparna, Meher, and then from Saeed and Sushant, to the three of you, my colleagues here. And as Stuart's talking about this, I'm going in my head about it's about the governance architecture. What are the objectives? But talk to us from today's point of view, where AI sits, where infrastructure decision making sits. Where does the power lie? Is it the asset owner, the financier, or the entity that controls the data or the organizational system? Does the ownership of infrastructure increasingly mean ownership of the intelligence layer today? So Mihir, Suparna, and Bertrand, from your point of view. And to Saeed and Sushant, more from a futuristic point of view, who's to blame, but who is in charge? So maybe Bertrand, and pass it on.
If I had to give a direct answer, I would say all of the above. And that's precisely the issue we're facing today. I perfectly agree with what has been said. And coming back to my point on AI is a tool, it's an amazing tool. It's fascinating. To a certain extent, if I may say, it's similar to finance. Finance, we can stay in this room and just with the support of a phone, we can invest for 20 years, 10,000 kilometers away doing nothing else. That's very easy. So these are very powerful tools. What do we do with that? How would you organize the governance? What are the objectives, etc.? That's precisely the question that is being addressed. And what is fascinating is that we're in a world where things are going very fast. And again, as you know, I'm responsible for Project Syndicate. So I'm trying to have people writing on AI. And people say, no, we write later. We have to go fast because we have to dominate the race. Once we have dominated the race, we can write about it. That's an issue. The second issue is that people say, I don't want to sign anything because I don't want to be blamed for saying things that, whatever. So we are at a point where precisely we need to address very forcefully the new governance system that we need to put in place for all these questions. And it's about consulting the citizens. It's about making sure that money goes the right way. It's about making sure that data don't go crazy, etc. And we have not started even to think about this. Everybody is swimming in his lane. Everybody says this is it. And we have really, and it's difficult because coming back to my analogy of the garage, there are not that many places where people talk to each other. That's why this summit is important. That's why it's extremely important. It's happening in India. Actually, I don't say that to flatter the people in this room. But I think it's extremely important that we discuss all of this. I don't want to be dictated by somebody who says this is it, full stop. And in particular with infrastructure, we know, historically, every infrastructure needed to take into account the population. So it's true that, we have plenty of examples in all countries. Many times we tend to not consult the population, say, we will do good things for you. You will thank us later, but please go away from this barrage, from this dam, go away from this road, go away. You will be happy later. I think we really have, with the powerful tools that we have together, we have to rediscuss all of this and to rediscuss it extremely fast. That's for me important. If not, this will run out of control for obvious reasons, because there is a lot of money and a lot of vision behind this. Coming back, and I finish with that, we are at a moment where geopolitics has become a little troubling, where you have people which have become extremely powerful, technology-wise, money-wise, etc., and these people don't have a neutral way of the world. And I just don't want them to decide for me what they're going to do. So it's urgent that we address these fault lines in the system. It's not shocking, because it's the very beginning and it's very complex, but we have to address this upfront now.
Yeah, this is a very interesting point of view from the infrastructure. And I come to Stuart's point about the coexistence, where the enablement of the man and the machine together creates something greater than each. In infrastructure segment, as I mentioned, it's a migrant workforce, informal sector. COVID was the catalyst in this. When the workers migrated to the villages and there was a huge vacuum, so to say, at the sites. And then when people realized the importance of digitalization, the other aspect is, which I was talking about, is quality. Now today, L&T has an order book of around $80 billion. We need workers, apart from who, we have around 3 lakh of labor population working for us. More than that, actually, 3.5 to 4 lakh. We need around 50, 60,000 more workers. Now there are hands, but where are the heads? We have the hands, but where are the heads? So if you have to bring the heads to the hand, you have to enable them digitally. And that is what is happening today through the means of robotization, where unsafe work, like, sewage pipeline inspection, drone inspection at heights, safety, gear, whether, for example, in L&T, every worker, the 3.5 lakhs plus, all of them, there's a face recognition and a PPE recognition device that anyone is deviating from there, they will immediately be called on. So all of these have enabled many repetitive work, like, whether it's paint mixing, whether it's slab laying, concrete mixing. Much of this work is also carried out by robots. So we are actually at a point where the automation, the AI, and the digitalization is aiding humans to improve infrastructure, to improve the quality, to improve the health, to reduce perhaps the number of working hours while not sacrificing the overall timeline and the content of the project. So we are at a very interesting inflection. And also, if I may just add one last point, is that this comes at the right time, because as the older workforce is going away, their knowledge, which was earlier not getting concentrated into a vault, is happening, and which will be passed on in a manner to the younger generation, which is taking over, who will be more digitally inclined and more digitally educated through the centers of excellence and skill sets that we all have generating.
Well, I'd just like to say, since time is very short, I'd just like to say that there is a lot of information asymmetry in this whole thing. That at this point of time, data in the construction industry is totally fragmented, even at the level of the government, or whether in the finances, or whether with the utility managers, or the people, the contractors like Larsen and Toubro. All of these are working on different kinds of data, and AI would enable, definitely would try to build, should try to build a system which is supportive and good. Of course, it compensate for accountability and general governance things. So AI would have to check on that.
Just very quickly, I think one way of thinking about all of these questions is, who do you trust? All those decisions that Stuart had talked about, who do you trust to make those decisions? And I think openness is a way of fostering that kind of trust.
I would say the information has to be with everybody, depending upon what their relevance in that particular thing is. So that's it.
Check, yeah. Well, I think we can keep going on and on about this, but let me get a quick round of one sentence takeaways, starting maybe with Susan and back to Stuart here. We discussed power, geopolitics. I'm inquisitive. Who builds the tech, owns the infrastructure? I don't know. Uncertainty is out like crazy today, but what happens to our human values? So, a question as your all takeaways, one sentence each, and we close this up. How do we remain resilient to chaos and uncertainty?
So be human first.
Restore the balance between academia, industry, and government.
Public-private partnership, in this sense that the government and the people come together and overall in the context of democratic values.
Transparency and skilling.
Well, I think, as you said, remember that there is nothing more precious and more important than we, the people on this planet. And this is the fight of the next century. We are spending $3 trillion to build weapons. We are Homo sapiens, which means we're supposed to be wise. These 3 trillions will be better used to go in the direction we discussed today. But I know why we build this, I'm not naive.
Yeah, I think the human systems that have evolved over millennia are very complex, very capable, but also they are very subject to disruption. And I think if we want to make sure that the human race continues to be in charge of its own development and the evolution of our own civilization, we actually need to get a better handle on how our civilization actually works. A gigantic socio-technical system with billions of components. How does it actually work? What happens when you prod it in this way or that way, or you remove that component or add this other component? We don't know the answers to those questions, and we're kind of doing a giant and possibly irreversible experiment with our civilization right now.
Please give a big round of applause to all our panelists. Thank you all. And look forward to continuing the conversation.
You got one.